This is Marketing from the Frontlines, where we speak with B2B marketers who are in the trenches, bringing technology to market. Here's your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines.io.
Hey, everyone, and thank you for listening. Today, we're speaking with Glenn Manoff, CMO of Riverlane. Glenn, what's going on?
Hey, how are you, Brett?
I'm great and really excited for this conversation. So you're calling in from the UK. You're from Philly. Talk to us about how you found your way to the UK 30 years ago.
That's easy. I fell in love with an English girl and we moved around, made a stop in London. I was a journalist at the time and never left. So that was 1995 and came for a short stay, and it's become a long stay.
When you were a journalist, what types of stories were you working on?
So I wanted to be writing about foreign affairs and war and traveling the world. I studied international affairs and international economics, and that was kind of my dream. And what I found pretty quickly, and a lot of people had advised me that writing about business, international business, was more interesting. So I got into writing about international business, was writing about energy, global oil markets, found that a bit staid, and then I found tech. So I started writing about the internet. This is in the late 90s. The internet was booming. .com was booming. Telecoms was booming. And I ended up editing a title called Comms Week International, which was at the heart of the global boom in deregulated telecommunications. And me and everyone else that I worked with eventually got kind of snapped up and pulled into the private sector. So being a journalist is great, and I would always recommend it. But at times when things are booming, you feel like you're on the sidelines, and, jumping into the game feels a bit more exciting.
A lot of journalists I know, or a few that I know, when they've made that crossover into, working for a tech company, it almost feels like they've switched sides. I see those jokes a lot when a journalist will announce that maybe they're moving into PR, they're going in-house at a brand. It's like they're phrasing it as I'm, going to the dark side. Did you have that feeling when you were making that switch, or did that sentiment not exist in the
No, it exists. I mean, the British phrase is poacher turned gatekeeper, right? Jump into the dark side, poacher turned gatekeeper. I never felt that. And one of the reasons is I was writing about a sector that was just super exciting. Like everyone wanted to write and talk about .com, maybe a bit less about telecom, but that was, at that point, Europe was going through what the US had gone through maybe 20 years earlier when they broke up AT&T. So huge amounts of innovation. And I was writing about all these new companies. And one of them in particular was called Esprit Telecom, had these insane lunatic founders. And they were like, we are going to win by being the most obnoxious, noisy, ridiculous, stunt-driven kind of characters, build a name for ourselves with no money. I mean, this is a well-known playbook now, in the internet, is seek attention. But at that point, this is, really before the internet. This is mid to late 90s. That was quite novel. And they did it by just attacking these ex-monopoly companies and calling them names and asking for regulators to put them in jail. And I just thought these guys were funny and fun. They called me up and said, hey, come join us. We need a guy like you. You really know all this stuff. And I called back and I said, trust me, hire someone that knows what they're doing. I've never done corporate comms, PR. I don't know a thing about it. And I'm going to be a catastrophe. And they said, good advice. And then they called me back a month later and I said, we can't find anybody. Come join us. And then I did. And for a year, I proved them right. I knew nothing. I did everything wrong. It took me 6 hours to write a press release. I just learned by doing. I was the marketing director, comms director, internal comms director. I was doing investor relations director. We were a public company, traded on NASDAQ and the European ESDAQ exchange. You learn by doing. And probably took a couple of years off my life. I was working 18 hours, but I loved it. And I've kind of been on that pace ever since. It's toned down a bit, but tech moves fast.
I think that, what you were just talking about there, that challenger brand mindset, the challenger brand playbook, for sure, a lot of people are trying to do that now. I see that happening. And then going back in history, I think Salesforce, at least now, I know that a lot of that story has been kind of stretched from what I understand when they took that challenger position against Siebel. But I have to imagine at that time it felt fun, right? Did it feel like you were the renegades, you were doing something wildly different? Was that the internal mindset?
I think this is going a long way back, right? But doing something different and being a challenger and having huge courage of your convictions, that's a theme throughout my career. And being a challenger doesn't always mean being the obnoxious attention seeker, guerrilla marketeer. So I went and worked for a company called O2. O2 is one of the biggest and most transformative brands in Europe over the last 20 years. I started a few months after the brand was created, and that was never meant to be an obnoxious challenger brand that was seeking attention. It was meant to be a really innovative consumer lifestyle brand that broke new barriers and new boundaries when it came to what a brand could do. So we opened up the O2, which is now the most successful live venue in the world. We did things with marketing to communities, which at that time were untouchable, the gay communities, some of the Asian communities. We thought differently about how we priced things. We thought differently about the brand stories we told. So that was a challenger brand that wasn't about being obnoxious or look at me or kind of clickbaity. It was just about doing things with a very, very particular point of view and then ruthlessly, consistent and executing on that point of view. So to me, that's challenger brand, whatever the personality of the brand is. It's that same challenger mindset.
I can't remember the agency. There's an agency there in the UK that's mapped out like 11 personas, or maybe it's 9 personas of a challenger brand. And like they put them into different categories. So I think it sounds like what you're talking about there is like one of those categories would be like, I can't remember off the top of my head. Maybe it's like the rebel. Can't remember. I'm going to butcher it. So I won't try to repeat it, but it's like the different personas within a challenger brand.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the agency you're talking about, but I can imagine there's more than 11, right? There's every which way is, there's as many personalities as there are kind of people. And, the brand has to fit you, your strategy. It has to be authentic to who you are and not be like some suit of clothes you put on because you think that's going to get you clicks. I mean, that will work, but it won't work in the long term. It may work well in the short.
Let's switch gears here and let's talk about the product that you're marketing today. And I say marketing because as you were just talking about in the pre-interview, it's a technology that doesn't really exist quite yet. And there's a customer base that doesn't quite exist yet. So what is that product? And then let's talk about how you think about marketing.
Yeah, so the product is something most people have probably heard of, and a lot of people probably don't understand very well, and maybe one level above them in terms of understanding. So it's quantum computing. I think lots of people recognize, oh, that's cool. That's the next big thing. These must be really seriously big, powerful, cool computers. Maybe some people know a bit about quantum physics and quantum mechanics and what makes them work. The reason I say there isn't a product yet, and there is a product, we're very early stage. We're at the adoption curve. We're at the early stage of the adoption curve because the product itself, the technology, isn't fully mature. And what I mean by fully mature is a quantum computer is mature when it can do things that are practically useful that even the world's biggest supercomputers can't do. And quantum computers can't do that yet. And they can't do that yet because we collectively, the technologists, the industry, haven't yet got to the point where we can scale up to have one that's big enough and reliable. So we're close. Depending on who you ask, we're 3 years away from the first truly, people use different names, quantum supremacy or utility, but the first useful quantum computer that surpasses the ability of a classical supercomputer or high performance computer could be 3 years away, 5 years away, 10 years away, depending on who you ask. And all three of those may be right because the first basic applications are probably going to be around 28, 29. And then you're going to get to much, much bigger applications where you need quantum compute 10 or 100 times more by, say, 2035. So we're talking about a long adoption curve, but a transformational technology. So what's fascinating about quantum computing is it can do things that no other machine in the history of humanity could ever even imagine doing and solve problems that are absolutely impossible, whether you took every computer on the planet and stitched them together to make the world's biggest supercomputer and stitched together 10 other planets, you would not be able to solve problems that a quantum computer could solve. So that's what's interesting about the industry. And the challenging part is telling these stories and exciting people, investors, governments, the general public, prospective employees to jump in and get involved in something that may not come to full maturity for another decade.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
Who is the primary stakeholder that you're trying to reach right now? You just mapped out a few different groups. Is there one where it's like, right now we have to really get this one right? Or is it completely distributed? All of those matter equally right now?
Yeah. So for Riverlane, for the quantum computer maker who's trying to make a complete quantum computer, what you call full stack quantum computer, that question would be slightly different. I think Riverlane, the company I work for, so we're Cambridge University spin out. We're based in Cambridge, UK. And our technology is something called quantum error correction. It's something specific to every technology has an error problem. And you have to correct the errors to stop the machines becoming unreliable or just melting down. That's a huge problem in quantum computers. And you solve that through massive data processing, massive problem solving through codes and series of technologies about encoding data and decoding data at incredible speed. So imagine all of Netflix global data, all of Netflix global streaming data flowing through one quantum error correction system every second, correcting terabytes and terabytes of data. And what's particularly interesting about quantum computers, if people know the story of Schrodinger's cat, you can't look at information that is in a quantum state. So what's magical about a quantum computer is information in the quantum state is in the superposition between 0 and 1. And you build a processor that look at information that is either 0 or 1 or any possibility in between. And that allows you to solve problems that really mimic nature. Information in superposition is unstable and it can't be observed or it destroys the superposition. So in order to infer the errors that are going to occur, you need to infer them on qubits, these quantum bits in both 0 and 1 that are not part of the quantum computer, but that you're looking at destroying, inferring the error on the other qubit. And you're doing this at a rate of terabytes and terabytes per second. So we're solving that problem, building the chips and the intelligence to do that and the data processing capability. And ultimately what that will look like is, say, Riverlane will be to quantum computing what Nvidia is to AI, or what Qualcomm is to mobile networks, or maybe what Intel was to personal computers, or what ARM is to our mobile phones and connected devices, which are essential chips that does a critical processing need that allows the computer to scale and be reliable. So that's our business model. So that's a long answer to the question that I haven't answered yet. Who is our critical stakeholder is quantum computing companies who need this technology in order to scale, because it's a hard problem for each quantum computer company to solve individually. In the same way that everyone that wants to utilize AI is not going to invent their own chipset, they're going to go to Nvidia. And the other is government. So most of the money that's coming into quantum computing today, you'd say the customer is the government. And the reasons the government want to buy quantum computing capability is their sovereign interests in defense and cybersecurity, but also there's huge growth potential. So the same way the US reaps huge benefits from Silicon Valley in terms of GDP and growth and jobs and innovation and global power, quantum has that potential, and countries, I'm going to say companies, countries want a piece of that. And therefore the big countries, US, EU, UK, and then smaller but powerful countries, European Union collectively, Singapore, Australia, these sorts of countries have big quantum programs, China, of course, Japan. So there's a bit of an arms race, not to build arms, but to build quantum computers that can deliver these sort of economic benefits and solve these really, really hard human problems.
In the US, there was a stigma in Silicon Valley, at least, kind of against working with the government, especially if it had anything to do with anything that could even touch on defense. Was that the case in the UK? Was that the case in Europe? Did that stigma exist in that same way?
Well, I think in quantum computing, it's a little bit different. So the money that's coming from government is not typically from defense. If you look in the US, who invested the money from government to create NASA, to create the internet, the semiconductor, these are coming from agencies like DARPA, which is from the Department of Energy, NASA, and it's similar kind of the agencies that are funding new technology like quantum. So it's not so much that it's defense money, although there are defense applications in quantum, but the real applications are in things like chemistry. So a quantum computer can simulate a chemical system in a way that no classical computer could. And if you can simulate chemistry in a realistic way, you can do things like design new medicines or design materials that will become a far better battery for storing far greater quantities of clean energy. So these sorts of applications have huge benefit, are not a military benefit. There are other applications which are interesting, which may not have as great a general benefit. For example, quantum computers are fantastic at looking at optimization problems. So if I want to look at 3 million different factors simultaneously, that might be useful, for example, for a financial trading algorithm. So there are applications in finance, doesn't necessarily make the world a better place, but may make the wealthier. But the big applications that I think people get excited about are medicine, design and discovery, material sciences, and the various ways we can develop materials that help us solve really difficult problems related to sustainability. And then very tricky optimization problems that come with weather prediction patterns, things like that.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
What I have to imagine is nice for you is you don't really have to pick the market, right? You don't have to choose which industry to focus on. Like, for example, we had a company called Carbonon. They're a unicorn company. They're in 3D printing. They had to really say, okay, shoes. We're going to win with shoes and we're going to expand with helmets. Then they brought the technology to market that way. And that's why it worked. For you, you're more just enabling the people who are building that technology to bring it to market. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Yeah. I mean, look, our goal, and it's a big goal, right, is if we succeed in being the world leader in this discrete technology to solve the error problem, which prevents quantum computers from scaling, and we build a chip system that we can sell to all the world's quantum computers, or many of them, that is a big, big prize for us, right? That is a big market. Today, it's a small market because these are still small experimental devices. But as these things scale, and they scale exponentially, there's the same sort of Moore's law in quantum as there is in other types of computing. The companies that I've said to you, whether it's Qualcomm or Intel or Nvidia is obviously now the world's most valuable. I don't know what day of the week, maybe it's the second most valuable. These are big, big marketplaces. Even these smaller companies, ARM, Qualcomm, these are $200 billion companies. So, our goal is how do we solve this problem when the people that we're competing with to solve the problem are called Google, IBM, Microsoft, Amazon, and a whole host of startups that are probably scale-ups now that have spun out of the world's leading university. And so our offices in the US are in Boston. We're co-located with spin-outs from Harvard, from MIT, all the technical universities, in the Northeast of the US. And we collaborate and compete with, in some way, most of them. We're more of a collaborator because we're trying to solve a universal problem that lifts the whole industry and provide both hardware and software to do that. But others are trying to solve that same problem discreetly as well.
But at least you're not overwhelmed by, if you're looking at quantum, like what you're just describing is it can do anything, right? From defense to life sciences. For you, you don't have to get that part right. You just have to make sure that there's a big enough market there, which sounds like there's going to be. Like, would you say your biggest risk is being too early? Like, is that a risk that you guys ever think about?
I think the risks are that we lose focus, and the loss of focus means that we're not getting to where we need to be, which is solving this quantum error correction problem and engineering a solution for rolling it out. That is a hard problem. It's one of the hardest problems humankind has ever sought to tackle. So that's enough to keep us busy. The other risks are, is there capital in the market? So AI went through AI summers and winters over the last couple of decades before it became what it is today, which is a proven technology that is now scaling at that kind of lightning pace. Right now, the world of quantum computing is very well funded. There's a lot of money from venture capital up through private equity, several public companies that have gone public on the stock exchange, and governments are investing a lot of money. So the capital that you need, and this is a very capital intensive industry, is there for us and for others. I think our view is over the next couple of years, you're going to start to see more of an A and a B list, maybe a C list, who's really winning, who's not. We may start to see companies merge. We may start to see some companies not be able to raise funds because they're not far enough along. And that's, I guess, what happens in every industry. So for us, we need to stay at the cutting edge. And I think my role as a marketeer is this is a complex story to tell because you're telling it to not so much general public. I speak to government ministers. I speak to editors of newspapers. We did a site visit today with the editor of one of the UK national newspapers. And you need to be able to talk to them about the message, and you need to be able to talk to a postdoc physicist about the message. who's reading Nature magazine or an archive paper about a very, very detailed technical bit of physics that is written in formulas and words. And you have to be able to stretch across all of that because those are your audience, deeply technical and deeply, let's say, business and political, that have an interest in the topic, but need things presented in a way that is clear and digestible.
You mentioned the two different markets there, the quantum computing companies and then the government. What are you thinking like 3 years out would be like the revenue split? Is it like a 50-50 business? Is it like 80-20? What does that generally look like? Or what's the thinking? Or is it unclear at this point?
So most of the quantum computing companies publish these roadmaps of how they're getting the technology built. Mm-hmm. And there's a consensus building that the best quantum computers will hit. There's different ways to describe it, but basically the point where you reach quantum utility for the first wave of applications around 28, 29. So before the end of this decade. And at that point, there's a bit of a chicken egg. So there are people developing interesting algorithms and applications, but until you have the machine, you can't necessarily develop all the applications because you don't have the machine to test them on. There's also a workforce that is quite small and needs to be developed so that people have the skills. Mm-hmm. So I would say around 28, 29, you're going to see the first kind of big wave of commercial applications that shift the pivot from government investing and creating the potential for these quantum companies to grow and thrive. I don't know the split. Maybe you're going to get to around 50-50 by the end of the decade. Mm-hmm. And then in the 2030s, I think it'll become 100% commercial.
Final question for you. I'm saying we're getting close to being over on time now. What advice would you have for marketers that are going into deep tech and they're moving into this world where they haven't come from that world before? Maybe they have a background more like yours. Like, what's your survival guide? What are some survival tips? And not just surviving, but thriving?
Well, I think the good news is that no matter how deep the tech is, and I'm in probably the deepest tech that you can be in, right? We're at the cutting edge of human knowledge in quantum science, quantum mechanics, and quantum computing, and we're solving impossible problems. It's still about storytelling and the ability to tell really compelling stories and be really clear on your audience or your audiences and how you tell different stories to different people. And then when you add up those stories, it's how do you build brand? And whether you're in a consumer company selling some sort of FMCG thing, or you're in a company like mine, the skills of brand building and storytelling are equally important. You may use different tools. We're not on TikTok, we're not on Instagram, but the tools of storytelling and the tools of brand building and the tools of creativity are exactly the same. And they're equally important here than in any consumer or even fashion brand.
Amazing. I love it. All right, we're going to wrap here. Before we do, if there's anyone that's listening in that wants to follow along with you, where should we send them to?
Well, it's Glenn Manoff. So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest place. You can find me on email. My email is glenn.manoff@riverlane.com. And you're not going to find me so much on X or Blue Sky. I'm more of a reader than a poster. So look for me on LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Amazing. Glenn, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Take care.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.